Welcome back to Why Should We Care About Africa Data Centers, a podcast where we tackle the big questions shaping the industry. I'm Ville Wackling, and in this episode, we will dive deeper into one of the biggest challenges facing data centers: power. Powering data centers is no simple task. They require vast amounts of energy to operate efficiently, and the challenge in Africa lies in balancing sustainability, reliability, and cost. Different regions are taking different approaches. South Africa is navigating its reliance on coal and load shedding. Nigeria is struggling with an unreliable grid, slowly shifting towards gas-powered solutions. And East Africa is leveraging its strengths in hydro and geothermal energy. But is this enough? In today's episode, we'll explore how data centers are powered in different parts of Africa and the viability of renewable energy for data centers. What role does energy regulation play in enabling greener solutions, and could nuclear or small modular reactors be part of Africa's data center future? We'll hear from industry experts who are working on these solutions, discussing the trade-offs and the technological advancements and the future of sustainable energy in data centers across the continent. So, whether you are a data center operator, an investor, or just someone curious about how digital infrastructure is powered, stay with us as we break down the realities of powering Africa's data centers. Let's get started. Africa is huge, 54 countries to be precise. The way data centers are powered differs. I wanted to find out exactly how data centers are powered in the East, West, and South Africa. The focus will be on key markets such as Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. Faith Waitaga gave me a thorough breakdown.
Looking at East, South, and West, if you'll allow me, I will only look at the main countries that have the biggest data centers, so that's South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. If I start in South Africa, they run their utility generation on coal, and most of their data centers are powered directly from utility. You would find some operators who have solar plants that they're using to feed their data center, but primary would be utility, secondary generators, and the solar maybe just for purposes of being more green. In West Africa, to say that they have a utility, I think for me, doesn't work, because each and every home, each and every office in Nigeria has a generator and their primary is genset. Yeah. Utility for them is very unstable. So in this case, most of them are running on genset. Utility, if, like some clients I've seen, have actually pulled a cable for themselves direct from a substation all the way to their facility, and it's still not primary because it's still not running 100% of the time. So they still have massive gensets, massive fuel holding on facility. But a trend I'm seeing in West Africa is many of them are putting up gas generators, because natural gas exists in Nigeria and it's huge. They have 80% of the natural gas resources for Africa. So that's what they're using. That's what I'm seeing clients move to. You come to East Africa, the grid is reliable. It's run on hydro, on geothermal, and like I said, a little on diesel. So then most clients are relying on the grid. Genset is secondary. They do have some of them, some solar on site. And the trend I'm seeing in East Africa is data centers being designed closer to the source of geothermal, yeah, or closer to hydroelectric power stations.
Yeah. How can we make South Africa and to an extent West African data centers green, right, in terms of energy?
So West Africa is already doing that, because if they go natural gas, they're already going renewable. Yeah. So they've answered that question. South Africa would consider solar as one of the options. Their grid can be stable. Their grid is stable. just that they have the load shedding sometimes and sometimes they don't have. But to quote one of my clients, he said data centers in South Africa are considered an institution like a hospital, because if the data center goes off, chances are that the bank will go off, the hospital will go off, the schools will go off. So then, because they're considered an institution, on the load shedding priority, they don't get to have load shedding unless it's very, very critical.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think in terms of that, they're doing well so far. In East Africa, I think the move to getting data centers closer to geothermal is pretty good. And I'd like to see more renewables on data centers, mini grids perhaps.
So what are the main primary challenges in not doing so already?
Wow, that would be a good question to ask an operator. Because it's something I would want to hear from them. What are the challenges? Why aren't they designing for it from day one? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'll put a note to myself that I'll ask these questions from them as well. That's very good. Sounds like we have a very different set of energy sources and situation in each of these key markets. South Africa is relying on fossils with the promise of increasing their solar production. Nigeria, struggling with unreliable grid and generator reliance, is looking to natural gas to cut emissions, while Kenya is having already a 90% plus green grid. Let's dive deeper into each main market and first learn what's going on in Nigeria. I spoke to Lars Johannisson, the CEO of Rack Center. They have decided to go completely off-grid in Nigeria. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I think it's interesting why we went off-grid from day one, because even back in 2013, that was actually a strategic decision by the company not to connect to the grid that do exist in Nigeria. And I think to have uptime in a data center, which is mission critical, to sustain that performance that we have done as a company now for the last 11 years, that requires a lot of innovative thinking and planning and thinking ahead. I mean, data centers by nature are a very energy demanding industry, and this environment will obviously, there are challenges around the grid and grid access and grid power. You need to think outside the box sometimes to actually make this happen. So we started as everyone else with an ownership of our diesel engines infrastructure that sustained and drove our performance for many years. Around 2022, we started to discuss other options. What can we do to, one, improve our carbon footprint? Number two, probably look at the CapEx optimization and cost around everything we do, and also increase resilience. We started with gas turbines. We replaced essentially all the diesel engines that have been in place for many years and inserted fresh new gas turbines. And that has actually been a successful path. It is now running operations on 95 to 97% of the time. And we did that now for the last 1.5 years. And now when expanding into our new 12 megawatt facility in Nigeria, we will continue that path to grow with gas turbines. It has given us, a scalability. It gives us uptime. And one thing that we need to think of the whole time is that once you connect yourself to grid and grid goes down, you normally fall back to power source number two. That could be diesel engines. The more times you fall back again, back and forth, this creates a bit of a stress on the whole system. And the fact that we are independent in that sense now on the gas turbines, and we're running that at such a high level, we don't have many fallback situations at all. Our systems are very stable, so we don't create any stress either on the people, on operation maintenance, on the system. And that is actually one of the reasons, apart from the staff, that maintained this very high uptime with a better carbon footprint than other cases. Okay. It's not that I don't think the grid has not improved the last years. It has in Nigeria, but it still comes with the challenges. And in our business, we need to bet on 100% uptime. That is actually what we stand for. And we felt always that the best way to do that with the people that we have is to make sure that we own the infrastructure and we can manage that infrastructure. And what we do with it is within our boundaries control. That makes it way easier. And I think that has been very, very successful so far. But I think to drive a data center in Nigeria is by all means very challenging for many aspects, but power is the biggest one. But I don't think it's the industry as such is not nowadays only talk about energy efficiency. It's also talk about energy sustainability, because they have a low POE, for example, which is kind of very important sector. That's all good, but once we all hit the same level, the question becomes, okay, how can you drive this in a more sustainable way? And I think we have partly answered that question by doing gas turbines. Is not good, but it's better. But more important, we also taken a decision to increase our solar renewable footprint way more, both on a current installed capacity and what we're building for the future now. And that will make the mix even more resilient with a lower footprint. So I believe in the concept that we defined with sustainable digitalization, because I think it has to be around that, not only energy efficiency, but also sustainability around this digitalization, because everyone is talking about it, and we are taking the same debate and same leadership in Nigeria. And to own energy demanding business in Nigeria comes with a lot of responsibility. So I think we need just to take the next step, and that is to consistently have our energy efficiency. That means that we are as efficient as we can be with a very scarce and limited resource, which is energy in Nigeria. That's number one. And number two, make sure that our energy consumption is based upon whatever percentage of renewable we can have. And between both of them, we make the absolute best usage the whole time of people, consumption, and technology to make sure that we can run it as efficient as possible. Because I think we need to drive digitalization in the same way as the energy, what can I say? We need to drive our data center in such a way that it becomes sustainable together with the rest of Nigeria evolution. We cannot do it in an isolated way. We need to do it together, because digitalization is all about, connecting everyone to the digital world. So we have a fair amount of responsibility here, which we take on.
Gas turbines have the potential to reduce emissions in Nigeria up to 50%, or potentially even more if biogas is being used. Elsewhere, solar energy is still often seen as a go-to renewable source, but is it enough? I spoke with Clement Martineux, co-founder of AX Africa, to find out.
The data centers are becoming so big that even adding a bit of solars on the roof, etc., is actually a drop in the ocean compared to your power consumption.
Yeah, that's what I understood.
You need hundreds of acres of land to supply your data centers with solar, if you were to do it. And that is going to be only a few hours a day. During the other 18 hours when there is no sun, you still need to get some power from the grid. So yes, solar is a bit of a plus. It's a tiny bit of I tick the box of, yes, I have solar panels, but it's actually not a big game changer for new big data centers.
Okay, that's very interesting. So for big data centers, having them covered with solar panels is not going to make a massive difference. So like potentially my data center is going to be at when fully developed, we call it the IT load will be 22.5 megawatts. So the IT load is just what is going to be consumed by the servers. Okay, you add the cooling, etc. So these data centers may consume at peak 30, 35, call it 40 megawatt. And I think you can usually have you have roughly a megawatt or 2 megawatt per acre of land. So to supply these data centers, I would need, I don't have, maybe some experts of solar will quote me wrong, but you will need 50, 60 acres of land, which is not really possible if you're in very developed areas like Mombasa Road, Nairobi. And then in Kenya, there is not yet this wheeling where you could potentially have a solar farm 50 kilometers from your data centers and pay the transmission lines a fee. They are thinking about that, but it's not yet the case. And even if you have that, you only have power, you need 50, 60, 100 acres to supply your data center for 6-7 hours a day. You still need the 18 hours, you need another supply. So then you will have maybe a bit of wind turbine potentially in Nairobi that they function at night quite well. But they move at night. In the morning, there's less wind, and the solar is not yet there. So there's still a couple, 3-4 hours in the morning and same thing in the evening, where you will need another supply of energy. So
it will help a lot. It will to have those, but it's actually it becomes almost another business, right? You become an energy developer,
Exactly. Yeah.
which is potentially not what I do, but it still could be a real estate business at the end of the day. You buy land or you lease land, you put solar or turbine, and you supply yourself with power. Kenya is not yet there, but they are working on that. Yeah.
Clement pointed out that solar requires vast land areas and that regulations can make it hard to transport power to data centers. So while solar has potential, it may not be a silver bullet. Let's hear more about solar from Susan Bhatia from ICOLA.
So I think we look at it from a regulation perspective because early last year, the EPRA, which is the energy regulator, gazetted some transmission and distribution laws that will allow wheeling, which is allowing you to be able to transmit or distribute power from longer distances. Because the challenge that we have is we cannot really put mini grids or solar grids away from our compounds to power data centers, which creates a problem because you cannot transport power across boundary lines, which is property lines. So we only, that's the regulation in Kenya at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it is. So that's the reason why we only put solar on top of our roofs. Like, for example, in our Nairobi data center, we do have a lot of solar. We do have a small solar plant, but it's on the premises. And where our data center is located, it may not be the best use of land because it's located in Karen. And for you to put solar, because we've put solar on a whole acre of land and plus on top of our roofs. And we are discussing with our neighbors. Every neighbor of ours knows us because we want to lease their roofs because we think this is the way to go. So once these are implemented, we've had multiple discussions with the regulator. It's still in draft form. I know this is the way they want to go, where you'll be able to transmit power. For example, set up a mini grid, maybe kilometers, 100 kilometers away, and transport it back to your location. And this will make energy cheaper. This is happening in South Africa. And that's the reason why our sister company, Terraco, has been able to successfully achieve more solar capacities than we have, because this has actually been implemented in South Africa.
Seems like some regulatory work needs to be done before Kenya can fully leverage on the potential of solar. Kenya fortunately has all of the other renewables available as well to power the grid. I spoke with Adil El Youssefi, the CEO for Africa Data Centers, about how he sees the use of solar in South Africa.
So in particular in South Africa, we had to accelerate our deployment of solar energy. So we have a sister company actually within the group called Digital Power Africa. And through this subsidiary and through other partners, we have deployed solar panels across all our facilities. Not only actually in South Africa, but also here in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Lagos, Nigeria. This solar panels are on the roof of our facilities, on the roof of the parking lots, or even on the roof of our neighbors, where we lease space on their locations. And they can actually provide sometimes up to 30% of the requirements, the power requirements of the facility. This is an example where the private sector has to come in, and like others, when we see challenges with power. Another interventions that we've done is to make sure that we improve the power efficiency of our facilities. So how much you're taking in and how much you're actually using, right? So that's a key metric of efficiency in our industry, in data centers, and it's something that we work on actively to make sure that we improve our productivity and that we make the right use of this resource. And lastly, there are technological advancements that allow the IT equipment housed in our facilities to be more efficient. And here, our customers are also very keen on this subject along their sustainability journeys and working on items like direct chip cooling or more efficient processors or storage equipment that allows them to consume less for same or more power, more capacity.
But I'd like to dig a little bit deeper to the solar question, because now this seems to be a little bit like dividing topic among the professionals in Kenya. I've heard that, this is just greenwashing, we'll put those panels there because, we have to fulfill certain ESG requirements and we want to look good. And I've heard that, hey, like this is a viable source of renewable energy if you do it right and at a meaningful scale. Well, you already told me that 30% can be done, or power, that your data center can be 30% powered by solar. So maybe you can speak about your kind of individual view to more depth about like how do you see the solar, like how viable option you see the solar being as energy source?
Very viable. I think one needs to be positive, right, around this topic. Of course, there is nothing comes for free, right? I mean, to deploy solar, you have to invest, you have to find, you have to take a lot of space, you have to maintain, etc. But solar consumption or solar deployment around the world is booming, multi-billion-dollar industry across the world. Everyone is deploying this technology because it makes sense. It reduces the cost of power. It reduces greenhouse emissions. It aligns with actually making sure that the sources can be more sustainable in the future. So there's no greenwashing here, I believe, around deployment of solar technology. What we need, actually, I believe, is more technology development to make the technology more efficient. I think the efficiency ratios are still less than 20% or 30% on those panels, right? So there's still huge opportunity to extract more through technology. There is a huge opportunity maybe to subsidize these deployment. And many countries around the world are leading in this. So I believe our industry has a responsibility as the data center industry, which is a big consumer of power around the world, has a responsibility to actually drive such technologies, such sustainable power generation technologies such as solar, so that they can not only be a solution for the industry, but also for the economy as a whole.
In South Africa, in the absence of other renewable energy sources, solar seems to be the number one. Adil thinks solar technology is already a viable option and believes that the sector keeps on developing and becomes more efficient in the future. However, solar still accounts only a limited percentage of South Africa's overall power generation. So how's the rest of the energy then generated? I spoke with Sean Versfeld, the Associate Director of Data Center Consultancy Royal Haskoning, to understand more about how data centers are powered in South Africa.
Traditionally in South Africa, I think easily over 90% of our power generation is via old traditional coal power fire stations, which obviously is not great for the environment and these type of things. But with South Africa itself, we are a big coal producer. It's quite cheap. It's relatively cheap for us to do production via that, and that's why it's always kind of been coal power stations. There has been, since we've had load shedding, which was what we introduced, we had some bad bouts, call it say from 3-4 years ago. There's been a big move to renewables, specifically from a solar perspective and a wind perspective. There's a lot of, in the northern Cape of South Africa, it's very dry, arid, and we've got a lot of good sun exposure. So there's a lot of big solar plants going up there.
How about nuclear?
So from a nuclear side, for me, the technology is there and it's been proven. Obviously, potentially at a different scale. I mean, we're not going to be building, although we are potentially talking about it, but we're not going to be building, 5 gigawatt plants required to power data centers. So that is where the terms small modular reactors come in, SMRs, where the one thing is true is that data centers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't know when it's going to stop. 3-4 years ago, we were maybe talking about 40 meg data centers as being big. Now we're talking about hundreds of megawatts data centers being big. I've heard, for instance, was it Microsoft or Google, specifically in Nairobi, talking about releasing a gigawatt size data center. Those things are marketing in themselves. So one thing is for sure that data centers will get bigger and bigger as we move to AI and GPUs and all these type of things which become power hungry. So if you want to power a 30 megawatt data center, are you going to do nuclear? Definitely not. Do you have grid availability for that? Most times you do if you can get your site selection right. If you want to build a 300 megawatt data center, does the authority have power for that? Most of the times, no. Specifically, if you're looking, in some countries where, some countries in Africa, their total current capacity in terms of production of electricity is only 5 gigawatts. So now you come and, you want to build a 300 megawatt IT facility, you're taking up a large chunk of that, that country's current production. So I think for me, nuclear is certainly a viable option to move forward with. To put on site, you put on a 400 megawatt nuclear reactor, small modular reactor to run a 200, 300 megawatt IT site, which makes it viable. Is the technology there? For me, I don't see why not, because we've done this on a larger scale. So I think it just needs to be proven at a smaller scale. I don't think it's necessarily the technology that can't be done. I think it's more the regulation of surrounding it. Nuclear is something that you either kind of like and you're like, hey, this is cool, I think it's really good, I think it's safe, or for many of the public opinion, is it safe, is it not safe? Just because I don't think the general public, including myself, are that aware of the exact regulations surrounding nuclear. So I think that is the big question at the end of the day. If you had to put a data center down and you had to have a small modular reactor, and you had residential suburbs located 2 kilometers away, would the residents be happy? Would cities be in uproar? Would people be in uproar? So I think it's more the regulation side that, say, maybe needs to catch up, or at least get pushed to market, or get educated within the market, necessarily more than I think the technology itself.
Sean offered a holistic view on the power situation in South Africa. Traditionally, coal has been the cheap source of power, but with the recent load sheddings, solar has started to pick up. He also mentioned nuclear as the potential source of clean energy. Regarding nuclear, I also want to speak with James Hudson-Mills. James seems to be more skeptical about nuclear.
Okay, so, well, listen, I believe in anything that is positive for the environment. I believe in anything that is potentially sustainable. I believe in anything that is cheap as a cheap source of power, because energy is what basically industrial economies require to engender growth, right? So to that extent, I'm definitely a big supporter of nuclear. I think that there are some fantastic scientists globally that have pushed the nuclear agenda over decades. And, it's a very important source of power. The one key caution, though, there are two key cautions about nuclear. A, it always ends up costing much more than you think. B, it always takes much longer than you think. So, to give you two recent examples in the UK, the UK is in the process of reviewing its current existing nuclear capacity. And it's working with a couple of companies like EDF of France. France has 70 to 80% of its power coming from nuclear sources, and they have a great source of intellectual capital in the nuclear industry. So the UK, having been a relatively early adopter of nuclear, is looking at the next generation of nuclear capacity. So to give you two examples of time and cost, Sizewell C, which is a very large-scale nuclear project that they're trying to develop in Suffolk in the UK. In 2020, i.e. just 4 or 5 years ago, the estimated cost of Sizewell C was going to be 20 billion. according to recent reports, that cost is now looking at 40 billion, right? So in just 5 years, the cost of that has doubled. Hinkley Point C, which is another nuclear development in Leicestershire in the UK, that project, if I remember rightly, was they started that in 2007. The target initially was that would be ready in 2017, and now they believe it will be ready in 2031. Right? So nuclear is a really important technology. It's clean, it's baseload. It can provide a significant amount of power. With respect to the data center sector, if I was at a hyperscaler, I'd be a little bit cautious about betting the ranch on nuclear, so to speak, because although you're going to get baseload and although you're going to get low marginal cost power, I'm not quite so sure that the cost estimates would be what you want. And also, typically with data centers, remember, 75 to 80% of the operating cost of a data center is power, right? But clients of data centers, like the hyperscalers, typically are very, very time sensitive. They will hit companies very, very hard if they miss timelines. That's what you're going to get with nuclear. You're going to get missed timelines. So I would argue that once again, you want to have a generation mix in any country. You don't want to be totally reliant on one source of power. But I would be slightly cautious of being totally dependent just on nuclear. So I think what you're seeing right now is hyperscalers needing to review their options on power. Power is such a critical element of data centers. I think that they want to understand it better. They want to make sure that it's going to be the right thing for their capacity. They want to have flexibility. They want to have choice. And they want to understand the science behind it. But I would be very cautious on relying solely on one nuclear project for one data center. I think there is a degree of risk attached to that. But I would throw in one other thing, which is that a lot of the time with hyperscalers and talk about nuclear, they're also talking about small scale nuclear rather than large scale nuclear. There is a hope that small scale nuclear will be quicker and cheaper with less issues on cost and delays. I'm not entirely convinced about that because if you want to do a nuclear power station or build a nuclear power station, one of the key things that you have to do is an environmental impact assessment. For nuclear power stations, these can be 30,000 page documents, right? So whether you're doing small scale or large scale, it's still highly complex. And so, I definitely, once again, I think all of these things should be looked at and reviewed, but I think it would be risky to be singularly dependent on one source of power.
Pavik Patni is VP for Corporate and Business Development at Raxio Data Centers. Raxio has chosen a completely different strategy, being a first mover in the second-tier markets such as Uganda, DRC, Angola, and Mozambique.
Again, I think we've been quite fortunate in some of our markets as well from an energy supply perspective. Most of the markets in which we operate are supplied by hydro, so they generate their energy from hydro, and as backup, just like all the data centers in Africa, we're using diesel generators, but the primary source of power is already quite green. Now, what we try to do from a green data center perspective to make these data centers as sustainable as possible is that from a power supply perspective, we make sure that we have redundant sources of power coming from the grid. So we're not relying on just one feed coming from the grid. We have multiple feeds coming from the grid from different substations. So that already takes down a little bit the risk of having downtime on the grid. Because if one substation goes down, you still have the other one that is still running and can still support that. And then, of course, if both go down at the same time, then we have then we're no longer running on the grid. Then we're using our generators. But what we've been pleasantly surprised to find, is that the uptimes in the markets in which we've been operating have been really good. In most of the markets, in some of the markets, I would say, for example, in Uganda, operating almost at 98.9% uptime on the grid, which is pretty much just green power. So we've been very fortunate in that way. But these data centers are also designed, when you think about sustainability, there's one which is like, how do you actually get the power into the data center? So you think about sustainability from a power supply perspective, then you need to think about it from a utilization perspective. So how do these data centers actually utilize the power that then comes in from the grid? And what we want to try and achieve is the highest level of efficiency. In data centers, we have this ratio, which is called the PUE ratio, which is the ratio that we're constantly trying to optimize and get these data centers to be running as efficiently as possible. Because the more efficient the data center, the less the data center needs to draw from the grid. And the case we try to make, especially to some of our customers, is that running small server rooms or running small data centers of their own by themselves in their own facilities can become very expensive because it's difficult for them to manage it from an energy perspective, from an efficiency perspective. These data centers are often running really efficiently, which end up costing almost 2 times more than what it would cost us to power the same kind of rack. And so, that's how we think about it. We've been able to design the most efficient data centers as well on the continent. I think trying to set a benchmark for what we should be trying to achieve in Africa, but very much also, I think the benchmarks are very close to what you would also find in more mature markets.
Havik reminds us of an important point. Greening the source of energy that powers data centers is one thing, but another important topic is to design the data centers to be as energy efficient as possible. I then wanted to zoom out and understand better the current situation and future potential of each renewable energy source. I called James Hutton Mills. James walked us through the pros and cons of each renewable.
I mean, I think where there is potential is particularly in solar. To build a solar project could take you, once you've got your planning permission, should take you somewhere, depending on size, anywhere between 12 to 18 months. So that is quick, right? To build a wind project, once you've got planning permission, will probably take you somewhere between 24 to 36 months to get it properly up and running. So I think, those are relatively clear as easy and quick targets. If you're talking about hydro, hydro I think is often ignored, but I think hydro is something that's potentially very attractive, particularly if it's baseload hydro. But typically what you have to do with hydro is you have to go through environmental impact assessments, and these are important things that you have to do. But those environmental impact assessments, depending on where you are, that can take anywhere between 2 to 7 years. So from a timeline perspective, the quickest forms of renewables, I would argue, are solar and wind. Geothermal is not as omnipresent as solar can be, particularly in Africa, or wind can be. It is something that is a little bit more site specific. What people often don't like about renewables is the fact that renewables are intermittent. So you can only produce power when the sun is shining. You can only produce power when the wind is blowing. With geothermal, typically you can produce a lot more power and a lot closer to base load throughout the course of the year. But the only reason I don't mention it, it's not something that you can do everywhere, but it's definitely a strategic advantage. It's not as cheap as hydro. It's not quite as cheap as solar, but it can be. But yeah, it's definitely an attractive source of renewables if you have it.
James then explained why renewables will be the future, even with the recent swing back towards fossils.
But I think the message on renewables overall, and the message, if you're looking country by country, is always to have a mix. You don't want to be entirely dependent on just one source of power. So, coming back to your earlier question about where the US sees renewables, at the moment, the pendulum has swung very much against renewables and against climate change. But I'm strongly of the view that pendulum is going to swing back. Fundamentally, you're seeing every year the world is getting hotter. January was the hottest month on record. 2023 of the last 2 years have been the hottest years on record. 2023 was the hottest year on record. 2022 was the hottest year on record. We're racing towards being 2 to 3 degrees higher than the industrial age versus a target of 1.5 as per the Paris Climate Agreement. So in the pendulum, there's no question the pendulum's going to swing back. And so, we see renewables and being green as something that is strategic. It's not something that is simply ticking an ESG box, but we also believe in doing something that's fundamentally right for the environment and right for generations to come.
What have we learned in the last 2 episodes about power? At least that powering data centers in Africa is a complex puzzle, balancing cost, availability, regulation, and sustainability. East Africa benefits from a green grid powered by hydro and geothermal. In West Africa, unreliable grids have made generators the norm, though natural gas is emerging as a cleaner alternative. South Africa still relies heavily on coal, but load shedding is driving a shift toward off-grid solutions, with solar and wind gaining traction. Speaking of solar, while it's promising, scaling it isn't simple. It requires land, and regulation can make energy distribution tricky. Beyond power sources, efficiency also matters. Optimizing cooling, IT infrastructure, and PUE ratios is key to making every watt count. Looking ahead, one thing is clear. There's no single solution. The future will rely on a mix of renewables, smarter energy use, and supportive policies. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Next time, we'll talk about how to choose the right location for a data center. See you then.
This podcast is part of the Data Governance in Africa initiative, helping the African Union shape data policies, enable cross-border data flows, and build secure, sustainable digital infrastructure. Funded by the EU and 5 member states, it supports a unified digital market in Africa.